Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to show you my round 6 game from the Pula Open. I faced a Slovakian IM, Petran P, who is, getting gold, but he's still a very strong player. He had a great tournament. He drew and won against 2400 players up until round 6. This is the tournament hall so that you can see it. Thank you to Adrian for recording me playing. This is a bit later on in the game, as you're going to see. In any case, I had a pretty good score until round 5, only had one loss, and I lost to IM Nenad Doric. In round 5, I defeated a German FIDE master, so I was feeling pretty confident. And the game starts knight f3. Now, against the Reti, I play what I call the Black London, the London system in reverse, because there are many situations in which white is simply worse out of the opening. Excuse me, he played c4 first. He didn't play knight f3. I played knight f3 in the previous round, but he played knight f3 on the second move. So I played c6, he played knight f3. And of course, after c4, c6, if white goes d4, we go into a sort of Slav, Semi-Slav, depending on what white does. And if white plays e4, we go into the Caro-Kann. With knight f3, the Reti, after d5, white has numerous options. And I keep saying this, and I'm going to repeat it once again. b3 is the easiest move for black to play against, because your London system in reverse cannot be punished with queen f3. Okay, there are many moves here. I think the most annoying is what I played against the German FIDE master in round 5, which is e3. I had white in this position in round 5, and the point is, if you want to play the Semi-Slav, you're not going to play the Semi-Slav, because now bishop f5 doesn't work, and when you play e6, you don't go d4 as white, you go b3 now, and the bishop is stuck behind the pawn chain. However, Mr. Petran played b3 straight away, and now my game is very easy. I can just play the reverse London because queen b3 can never be played. So knight f6, bishop b2, bishop f5, d3 and e6. Now, this is a well-known position. I have had it numerous times, and normally I will play bishop g6 eventually. Sometimes I will play bishop g4 before that. And depending on who my opponent is, I will decide which type of position to play. I have a new rule. You may have heard it. I set it for myself a few months ago when I had a family issue that was way more important to me than anything chess related or anything else in the world. So at that point I had decided, I'm going to play chess to get distracted from the main issue that was bothering me, and I will not play for draws unless my opponent is an IM or a GM. I have drawn too many games against people who are 2000, 2100, 2200 by either accepting a draw or offering a draw. So my new rule is no draw offers and no accepting a draw unless I think I'm worse, or unless my opponent is an IM or a GM. I think that's a good rule. Now, my opponent in this game is only 2150, so he dropped in strength, but he's still an IM. In any case, he played knight h4. And now you could go bishop g6 straight away, nothing wrong with that, but I played bishop g4, h3, bishop h5, g4, and now there are two moves. And I know both of them. Knight fd7 or bishop g6, and I couldn't decide what to do. And I started seeing ghosts. I'll explain which position I reached in my head. If you don't follow it, if you aren't able to follow it, I'll show it on the board. So knight fd7, white must save the knight, so knight g2. And now the point is that the knight's going to come to f4 and take the bishop anyway. So knight fd7, knight g2, bishop g6, knight f4, e5, knight takes g6, h takes g6, c takes d5, c takes d5, bishop g2. And how do I defend my pawn? My knight is on d7. I cannot go knight f6. I don't want to go knight b6. I'd completely missed that I can go knight c6, and on bishop d5 there is queen a5 check picking up the bishop. I didn't see that. This, for some reason, seemed slightly odd to me compared to the positions I know. I wasn't sure that it was the exact position, and I feared this. So let me show you. Knight g2, bishop g6, knight f4, e5, knight takes, pawn takes, c takes, c takes, bishop g2. And of course, the best move is knight c6. The pawn is immune. I could not visualize that properly. I'd missed queen a5. And of course, on queen a5, knight c3, there is bishop b4. In any case, bishop g6 is still a fine move. I played bishop g6. My opponent played knight d2. I played bishop e7, which may be slightly imprecise, but I wanted to set up tricks with knight g4, so bishop g2. Now on knight g4, the bishop defends the rook, and there are no tricks. If I take knight takes g4, I'm simply losing a piece because of knight g6. And if I take now, the knight isn't immune. In the previous position with the bishop on f1, let me just show you. So if white makes a random move, knight g4, knight g6, hg6, and you cannot take the knight. So that's why I played bishop e7, bishop g2, castles, and now once I've castled, my opponent takes the bishop, h takes, castles. Okay, and this is a very standard position, except that the pawn is on g4, not on g3, but I knew what I was doing. Rook e8, my plan is bishop f8, queen b6, and e5, queen c2, a5 first. This is a very important insertion, and white must play a3. If a4 is allowed, then ba4 runs into queen a5, and if nothing's done, I'm going to go a3. So a3, queen b6, rook a b1, defending the pawn in case the queen moves away, and bishop f8. Excuse me. Bishop f8 is an important move for two reasons. Firstly, my knight can move after queen c3 and I'm not hanging mate on g7. Secondly, I'm preparing e5. So when I played bishop f8, I offered the draw. And I know that this position is equal. It could even be slightly better for black because the pawn is on g4. And every game I'd played up until round 6 was a pretty tough game, and it took a long time, especially my round 2 and round 3 games. And, you know, I wanted to have one afternoon off. This was maybe 15 minutes into the game. So I was looking forward to a rest day. Basically, I wanted to go to the beach and have an early dinner for a change, because we kept eating at, I don't know, 10 p.m. My opponent, of course, declined the draw. I mean, he didn't lose a game against a single 23-2400. Why would he draw me? But, you know, I know that I'm equal or slightly better, so it wasn't impolite to offer. Okay, e3. Of course, e5, that's what I've been preparing. Rook fd1, rook a d8, and it's really not clear what white should do here. I mean, e4 is bad, d4 is bad, b4 is bad. What do you do? My opponent played d4, and I think black stands slightly better. Now, if you turn on the engine, it's going to say minus 0.2. However, from a human perspective, I think this is superior for black, especially after my opponent's next move. I was afraid of knight e5. And of course, I'm not going to take that, activating the bishop. But on knight e5, knight h7, I'm preparing f6 and f5 if I manage to defend my g-pawn. So maybe I go g5. So I wasn't really sure what to do against knight e5, but knight d2 didn't concern me at all. And now I have a problem. And this may be a sequence of moves that I'm most proud of out of any of my games during the tournament, and maybe in a long time. So here is my problem. I need to play f5, and I need to go knight h7, f5, f4. That's, you know, if you follow the pawn chain, I need to play for f5. There's nothing else I can do. White, on the other hand, is going to go c5. And once white goes c5, he's going to follow that up with b4. And I don't really want to play queen c7, because then my bishop is going to be inactive and my queen is going to be misplaced and my a5 pawn is going to be hanging in some cases, for example after bishop c3. So I played queen a7 in anticipation of c5, and that's the best move. Now my plan after c5 is to go queen b8, queen c7 if the pawn is attacked. And if my opponent does nothing, the main reason for queen a7 is I can go b6. So I'm basically forcing c5, now. Okay, now I have to be ready to defend the pawn, and I need to be ready to defend it twice with queen c7 and rook a8 if necessary, so I have to play queen b8, once again the best move, bishop c3, queen c7. Okay, and it's clear now that b4, b5 is coming, and it's clear that black's gonna have to play for f5 and ignore what white's doing. The main position white is trying to get is something I've played against more than 20 times, I would say, when you count in training games. White wants b4, b5, b6. And then the b7 pawn is very weak. The rook comes to a7, the rooks get doubled, and, you know, maybe knight b3, knight a5. So imagine a position where there's a pawn on b6, rook on a7, rook on a1, knight on a5. That's what white's trying to do. And then my queenside structure collapses. On the other hand, when I play knight h7 and f5, it's not at all clear how white should react, because gf, gf, I'm playing f4 anyway. And I couldn't decide who's better here. I couldn't, or better said, I couldn't decide whose threats are stronger. Okay, b4, of course. I have to take. Takes, takes, knight h7. I have to play f5. b5, f5. And apparently, according to the engine, my opponent made a mistake here. He played b6, which is fine, but the engine prefers rook a1, and of course I'm not taking that pawn. After rook a1, rook a8, b6, queen b8, rook a1, rook a8, queen a8, there is rook a1, and my opponent takes over the file. So that's the reason rook a1 is better now. But b6 is very similar to that. Queen c8. The reason I played queen c8 and not queen b8 is because I want to take the pawn on g4. And my opponent didn't do anything about that pawn, not that he could have done anything. Taking on f5 is bad. He played knight f1. The engine, I should say, says that the best move is f4, which I cannot understand. f4 takes and rook e3, that seems suicidal. It never even crossed my mind. But that's supposed to be best for white. Black is better, but that's best for white. My opponent played knight f1, and now I took and played knight df6. Okay, queen e2. And I thought, okay, I'm just taking that pawn. Maybe I'll be in trouble on b7, but I couldn't see how. And I just assumed that I was better. I took on g4 with the queen, which is a mistake. The engine plays knight g5 and says that black is much better. After knight h2 defending the pawn, you now go rook d7. And after rook d7, rook b3, I don't understand rook b3, or rook a1, I go rook f7 and start piling up on the f3 and the f2 squares. And of course, f3 can never easily be played. So that was the best plan. But I mean, even though after what I did, white is slightly better, which I don't understand again, I think my move is fine. Okay, queen g4, knight g4, knight h2, king h2, and knight g5. This is a very important move, because I have to play against f3. And when my opponent infiltrates down the a file, I need to have pressure on f3 and f2. So, and also I'm preventing bishop h3, which could be annoying in light of, you know, if I play rook d7, there might be bishop h3. So I wanted to be able to play rook d7, rook f7, or rook f8 without bishop h3. And my main goal here is to dominate the bishop on g2. I am up a pawn, f2 is a weakness, b7 is a weakness, but we can, for the moment, both hold on to our weaknesses. Okay, rook a1, bishop e7, rook a7. And I played rook d7 as planned, because there's no bishop h3. Apparently that's a mistake. I should have gone rook b8. That's the best move. And after rook da1, the engine plays king f7 with the idea of rook h8. I did not consider rook h8. I wanted my rooks on the f-file. That's a way for black to stay equal. So after rook a7, rook d7, white has an edge. Okay, rook da1, and here I played rook f8, which is what I'd intended to play, and my opponent played king g1 instantly, which I thought was the only move. Apparently not. white is close to winning with rook a8. Sorry, not king g1, that's what he played, rook a8. After rook a8, I don't know what to do. I cannot take on f7. If I play rook d8, then rook d8, and if rook d8, then rook a7 is busted, because if rook b8, there is simply king g3, and my opponent's king is coming into the position. King h7, bishop a5 is coming, maybe, and maybe even a sacrifice somewhere on c6. So this is supposed to be winning for white. Bishop f6, bishop a5, king f7, I don't know, bishop h3, bishop f1 maybe. So the engine says white's better. I don't see a win, but it's supposed to be a significant advantage. After king g1, it's equal, but I don't see any counterplay for white. Of course, I played knight f3. And this knight could be taken, but I play rook f3, and f2 is going to be a permanent weakness after bishop h4. I also have rook h3, and I could come into h1 if my opponent isn't careful, so he played king f1, which is the losing move. And the reason it's losing is a very nice tactical idea. Of course, after knight f3, white's threatening bishop h3, winning the pawn on b7. And if I go rook d8, rook b7, if I go rook c7, my opponent takes my rook. But the reason I went for knight f3 is because I saw that I had g5, and I'm really proud of this move. And my opponent was surprised, and you could see that he was, you know, distressed after g5. The point behind g5 is that it prevents bishop h3. If you play bishop h3, then I go g4, and you either move the bishop back and you have lost 2 tempi, or you take and lose the bishop. So on king f1, when I played g5, he realized that black is better. Okay, rook a8, g4, I don't really mind the trade. Now the bishop is completely dead. And the only thing I have to worry about is bishop f1, bishop a6. If that's covered, I can never lose, and there are no tricks. Okay, rook f8, king e2. In this position, apparently, I had a win with rook d8, which I didn't even consider. I wanted to, you know, put my rook on d8 if needed, not unprovoked, because rook a7 is coming. So I played bishop h4, preventing the king from moving, and threatening to play g3 if the king moves away. Apparently rook d8 was winning, and on rook a7, rook b8, and after, I don't know, bishop e1, I now go king f7, and I infiltrate on h5. And the point is that after something, I have g3, and my king is too close, and white is losing. And there is nothing, you know, white can do on b7, because I'm covering everything, and the rook on a7 is just as inactive as my rook. So after fg3, white just resigns. There's nothing here. I don't know, bishop h3, I just go king h4, bishop g2, king g4, and I'm coming in. Bishop b4, knight f3 check, or g5, king f1, I don't know, g5. And now I have a passed pawn, and it's a completely different story. I did not consider playing rook d8, rook b8. To be honest, I didn't see why the rook on b8 would be better than rook on d7. The reason is, my opponent cannot infiltrate on a8 and trade rooks. So when I played bishop h4, my opponent played rook a8, and now I could conceivably decline the rook trade, but in my mind, the rook trade was winning for me. Goes to show that, you know, my opponent's technique is much better than mine. When I played rook d8, I was really happy, and I'd assumed that I was winning. After king d1, which is what my opponent played, I am winning, but I still don't know how. So what I was afraid of here is, as I pointed out before, bishop f1, bishop a6. It doesn't really work, because if bishop a6, ba6, b7, bishop c7. So I either have to keep my bishop on d8, or I have to keep my king within the square of the b7 pawn, which is, you know, a very tight square. So I was afraid of that, and I played king e8, king d7, and you know, I got within the square. This position, if you turn on the engine, is minus 2.5, and you have to play actively. Bishop h4, best move. Now, if bishop, let's say bishop e1, defending the pawn first, knight h2 prevents bishop f1. And here is a sequence I had analyzed. White is waiting, there's nothing white can do to improve. I bring my king to h5. The king waits, knight f3 check, king e2, bishop d8, king h4, and eventually, after, you know, white waits, I go g3. And this is winning. Why is it winning? Well, I couldn't see that during the game, but in analysis it became really obvious. If you take on g3, I play king g3, and I'm, you know, gonna win your bishop unless you play bishop f1 or king f1. So takes on f3, takes, king takes, and now simply gf2, king f2, and king g4. And the pawn on e3 is a major weakness. All of white's pawns are on dark squares. I have a passed pawn on the g-file, and I'm going to come into e4. So after, for example, bishop d2, bishop h4, king e2, king f5, that's it. King f3, g5, g4, and my king is coming into e4, and I'm winning. I can see that this is winning. I couldn't see it from this position. What I could see is that I didn't need to play king e7, king d7 in order to defend against bishop f1, bishop a6, because my bishop was still on d8. But I couldn't see how to make progress with my bishop stuck on d8. So I played king e8, bishop f1, king d7, bishop e1, bishop g5. Okay, of course, king d2 loses, so bishop d2, bishop h4, bishop e1, and here my opponent offered the draw. And I thought for about 15 minutes. I knew that it was a draw. I knew that I couldn't win at this point, but I wanted to play on. The engine says -1.5, which simply isn't correct. There is, you know, that there's nothing to do. The engine gives black a big advantage and then just keeps repeating moves. So I played knight g1. This was, you know, the final trick, because I thought bishop e2 was the losing move. The idea behind this was that I wanted to go knight h3, and let's say, I don't know, my opponent makes a random move like bishop g2. Then I wanted to play knight h3 and put pressure on the pawn. And after king e2, I was hoping, you know, maybe I'm going to put my opponent in Zugzwang, because this bishop cannot move. Knight g1 is check. Maybe I can, you know, set up a position where g3 can be played. But that didn't happen. After knight g1, my opponent played bishop e2, and I was really confused. The engine still says +1.5 after knight f3 and bishop f1 and bishop f6, which makes no sense. And it's just a draw. But I thought that I have winning chances after knight e2. So I took, my opponent took, and then I realized, not that I don't have winning chances, I have 0 winning chances. So on king f5, I offered the draw, and we agreed to a draw. There is no way to make progress. I'd completely missed that I don't have time to play bishop g5 and g3. So what I'd originally intended was to go bishop g5, and on king g2 to go g3, which is weird, because, you know, my opponent takes with the king. If, say, my opponent plays king g1, then g3, okay, now we're talking. Now this could be winning. And if takes, I'm definitely winning. Because if you play bishop f2, I take, and this is a winning king and pawn endgame. In any case, after king f1, king f5, we agreed to a draw, because there's nothing I can do. So another endgame with bishops of the same color, which is extraordinary considering that in round 4 I messed up the exact same endgame, which was completely winning. This one was a draw from the get-go, but I still drew. And in round 2, I lost this endgame with equal material against I am Nenad Doric. So out of 6 rounds, 3 games finished with the endgame of bishops of the same color. I don't know what the probability of that happening is, but it has never happened to me before. And after the tournament, I started learning these endgames. I mean, not that I don't know anything, but my technique sucks. And thinking that this could be won is just bad. Losing against Doric in round 2 is bad. It was a very simple draw. Not winning against the Bevets in round 4 is abysmal. It was -5. So this is the only drawn bishops of the same color that, you know, it was a fair result in the end. The other two, I drew a winning endgame and I lost a drawn endgame. So a lot of work on my technique. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you liked the game. It wasn't a clean game, but I think g5 and queen c7 were really nice ideas. Thank you. Stay tuned for more chess. I'll see you tomorrow in the next one. Bye-bye.